Connor Phillips is a name you should know when it comes to Reds pitching prospects, and we are going to tell you why on today's Locked On Reds.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Reds with myself, Jeff Carr, and my co-host Stephen Offenbaker, and Tom Nichols, voice of the Dayton Dragons, is back with us again for part two of our two-part conversation as we look at the players and the names to know ahead of spring training for the Cincinnati Reds. By the way, happy pitchers and catchers reporting day as spring training officially begins here on Tuesday, February 14th. I know there's something else that happens on this day, but you know what? It's not near as important as pitchers and catchers reporting. And welcome into the Locked On Reds podcast that is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. Thanks as always for making us your first listen. We're free and available on all platforms. And as I always like to say, we love talking Reds baseball because Steve and I are addicts of this team, and we've turned an addiction into information for you. And make sure that you jump into the comments section here on YouTube, or if you're listening, follow us on Twitter at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs or at S Offenbaker with 2 Fs, because we love to talk Reds baseball, and we want to talk Reds baseball with you. And on today's Locked On Reds podcast, we're going to be talking with Tom Nichols about the pitching prospects who are coming up, and maybe a look ahead as well as to how the outfield situation can work out and what sort of players may move around there if that's the case. We are talking about the guys in the minor leagues who can make a big impact on this team this year and beyond. And we're going to start with a dude who a lot of people have tabbed as the top pitching prospect in the Reds organization, and that's Connor Phillips.
Well, let's transition into something that's even harder to figure out versus all these position players, and that is the pitchers and who's actually ready, who's not, and if they are ready, are they starters or are they relievers? And where I'd like to start with you, Tom, is a guy that has been intriguing ever since he got here, and of course that's everybody's favorite player to be named later, Connor Phillips. And he basically came over in this deal as the player to be named later, and I don't believe that he was ever a throw-in. He was never considered just an extra piece to get it done. He was always highlight 1B of that trade. It just took a minute for the Reds to decide who they wanted. That's my impression of that deal. So all that being said, he came over in that deal and pitched down in Dayton really, really well to the point that he got promoted out. So I'd just like for you to talk about him for a little bit and where you see him profiling. Is he going to remain a starting pitcher? Do you think that he tracks better ending up in the Reds bullpen? How do you see things playing out for him, both in the near term and the long term? And how soon do you think he'll be in Cincinnati?
A guy I really like, Connor Phillips, was the player to be named later in the trade that sent Winker and Suarez to Seattle. He might end up being the best player that came back in that deal. It's quite possible, I think. My expectations when we first got him, I'll be honest with you, I figured he would be a guy that would that would flash a lot of skills, but would also flash the fact that he has a long way to go, because he was a junior college guy who never made it to a 4-year school. I was a little bit surprised that right away they came out and said that he would come to Dayton. He had played the year before, low A, Modesto, had a 4.75 ERA as a starter in the Cal League. And I thought, well, maybe they'll start him back in low A again and give him a few starts. He was our opening day starting pitcher in Dayton, and he looked outstanding from the first day. I mean, way above what I expected. He was a dominant pitcher from the first day he set foot in this league. And he had a 13 strikeout game. Hard to do in this day and age because they don't let you throw as many pitches as they used to. So the club records for strikeouts are records that are hard to break. Our club record's 14, a guy that probably threw 7 or 8 innings to get to 14 strikeouts. And nobody's throwing 8 innings in this day and age in the minor leagues. Phillips is going to go 5 most games. And he would sit 97, 98, 99, not peak at those numbers, pitch consistently 97 to 99. Excellent breaking ball. When he commanded it, unhittable. Okay. You got that kind of a fastball and a breaking ball when you command that's unhittable. That's a guy that's going to make some people look bad up there. So he spent the first half with the Dragons, 90 strikeouts in 64 innings, ERA 2.95, 39 hits in 64 innings. Okay, that's pretty good. So they move him up to AA. He struggled initially and eventually finished the year with an ERA of under 5 at 4.93. Again, a lot of strikeouts, 60 strikeouts in 45 2/3. They did expose the fact that his command still isn't quite where it needs to be. And they were able to work 34 walks in 45 2/3 innings. That's a lot of walks. Mm-hmm. That's where the weakness came in. They were able to exploit that problem. And that happens when you got an area that as a pitcher or a hitter that can be exploited. When you move up, they find it. And so Phillips, I talked to him again. He was at Reds Fest, and he told me that he thought he probably would go back to Chattanooga to start the year. I'll be honest with you, Stephen. I'll be surprised if he gets a lot of innings in spring training, simply because they've got 30 pitchers that they're auditioning for spots. He's not one of them. So why would you give a guy like that a bunch of innings? He probably needs to be an early cut out of spring training and get back to the minor league camp where he can get on a regular 5-day, build up your innings, and then go to wherever he's going, if it is Chattanooga, and be ready to go 5-6 innings from opening day there, rather than trying to get an inning in a big league game every 5 or 6 days. That's just not the best way to get your starting pitcher ready for. So I don't expect him to have a lot of time on the mound in spring training, but I do expect to have some. Let's say 3 to 5 innings in big league games in spring training, maybe, and then back to camp and get him ready for opening day in Chattanooga, or maybe Louisville, but more likely Chattanooga. Great stuff. Will he move to the bullpen? Maybe, but not for a while. He's going to be a starter, and he'll keep starting until, a lot of these guys you're seeing, we saw them as starters in the minor leagues. Tony Santillan was a very good starter in the minor leagues. Amir Garrett was a very good starter in the minor leagues. Those guys were all starters, and some remained as starters, like Hunter Green and Graham Ashcraft and Nick Lodolo and Tyler Malley. Robert Stevenson was a starter in the minor leagues, became a reliever. It takes a while for that to play out, and we'll see. So another name to watch for. I hope the game that he pitches, or games, are televised. There's about, I think, 6-7 games on Bally Sports, some other games on MLB TV. I hope you get to see him in spring training because he is fun to watch. And if he's on, he is really fun to watch.
So with that, kind of like you said, there's so many different pitching prospects that are in camp that are vying for spots. When you look at those guys, who do you think has the best chance, the most likely to make that opening day rotation? Because we're talking about Brandon Williamson, Levi, Stout, Andrew Abbott, a guy that I kind of want to drill in on here in a few minutes. But of those guys, and even some that I didn't name, who do you think is most likely to fill out that rotation?
It's possible that, depending on how they want to go, that none of those guys make the rotation. That they go instead with Luis Cessa again back, who's been a reliever and finished last year as a starter. They signed a free agent by the name of Weaver that would be a candidate. And they've got Justin Dunn, who they got in that same trade with Seattle. There's a couple others, perhaps. Connor Overton was a guy that pitched well for him last year that had sort of come out of nowhere. He'd been out of independent ball. If they go with younger guys, you did mention the two that would be candidates, Williamson and Stout. Williamson probably regarded as a little bit further along. He had more time in AAA last year than Stout did. Stout came over in a midseason trade with Seattle, and Williamson also came from Seattle, but came over before the season, that Winker and Suarez deal. Both of those guys are potential long-term starters for the Reds. Will they, throw the dice and say, okay, the future's now. Let's get it going, guys. Let's give these guys a chance right now. They'll be in a different position than a Connor Phillips in spring training in that they're pitching for a job. So again, this goes back. You will know something when you start seeing lineups come out. Are they starting Williamson every fifth day and building up his innings like a starter? Is he given a legitimate chance to earn a spot, or does he go in and you see him just pitching maybe out of the bullpen when there's an opportunity? And that'll tell you something right there, because when I find out what the first, they'll have 5 or 6 starting pitchers when spring training games begin on the 25th, and that'll tell you where things stand and who the guys are. That the media conjecture will be over at that point, because you'll start to see who David Bell really has, along with their pitching coach, Derek Johnson, who they really have their eyes on as potential starters. I think those 2 guys you mentioned, neither of whom were in the Reds organization this time a year ago. Williamson and Stout, both good top 20 prospects. Williamson maybe a top 10 prospect. Will be interesting to watch in spring training.
There's a dark horse pitcher who could work his way into the rotation, which wouldn't surprise anybody, because this dude has had a meteoric rise through the Reds farm system over the last year. Tom, Steve, and I will talk about the impact of Andrew Abbott and what he could do this season to break into the major leagues, coming up next. Before we talk about that, though, I want to tell you about one of today's sponsors, and that is Built Bar. Grab yourself a Built Bar anytime you need a little bit of energy, because they have the kind of health statistics that make you think that you're going to be sticking to your diet, but they have the taste and the chocolate to convince you that you're not. Because every single Built Bar is covered in 100% real chocolate, and you're talking about up to 130 calories and up to 17 grams of protein in most bars. I know last night I went to work out, and after I came home, I was drained, felt like I needed a little extra something. Grabbed the cookies and cream Built Bar. Oh my goodness. If you haven't tried a cookies and cream Built Bar, go get yourself right now. You can check it out at built.com. But you can also go to Sam's Club or Walmart and find boxes there. We've been telling you for so long you can get it at built.com, but if you don't want to wait, head on down the road to Walmart, where you can find a 4-bar box of a couple of different flavors, including cookies and cream. Or head to Sam's Club and find a 13-bar box that includes flavors like churro. Just absolutely brilliant stuff. When it comes to Built Bar, they're going to mix healthy with tasty. Talking about amazing flavors. You've got cookie dough chunk. You've got coconut puff. You've got birthday cake puff. There's so many great flavors that will fit right into your diet, but you're not going to realize that you're sticking to your diet. That's built.com, or go find yourself some boxes at Sam's Club and Walmart today, and you can thank me later. Thanks as always for making Locked On Reds your first listen. Coming up tomorrow, we are going to break down some of the interesting storylines. Shortstop is quite a storyline when it comes to the Cincinnati Reds spring training. I'm going to tell you what Jose Pereiro can do to stave off the ever-rising stock of Elly De La Cruz. That's coming up on tomorrow's Locked On Reds podcast. But let's jump back into our conversation with Tom Nichols as we look at Andrew Abbott. With that one guy that I mentioned, and I've heard his name a lot leading into spring training, and that's Andrew Abbott, a guy who, different people are comparing, and kind of just the way that I've seen him rise through the ranks, I kind of look at him almost like Graham Ashcraft, as he's had that kind of a rise through the Reds system. What is his ceiling? Like, do you think that we will see him in the rotation at some point this year? Because that's the impression that I'm getting from the different things that I've seen.
Yeah, I'm not really a big guy on a ceiling or floor, because oftentimes they go outside of that your ramp, your specs. But He's a different kind of pitcher than some of the guys you and I and Steven have talked about. Okay, so let's talk about some of the top pitching prospects that were in Dayton that we talked about a lot on this show. Joe Boyle throws 97 to 100. Connor Phillips will sit at 97 to 99 consistently. Chase Petty in high school threw 102 miles an hour. Okay. Flamethrowers, all these guys. Ashcraft, you just mentioned, throws a 99 mile an hour two-seamer.
Right.
Andrew Abbott, 91 to 93. So not the same kind of guy, but success-wise in the minor leagues in Dayton, outperformed any of them. Okay. Outperformed any of them. His ERA in Dayton in the month of April last year, he made 5 starts for us. Actually, one was not technically a start. He came in, I think, after Luis Castillo, who was on a rehab assignment, and threw like 2 innings. So Abbott followed him that day. It was his scheduled day to start. So in the record book, it went down as a relief appearance, but it was a start. Okay, he made 5 starts, 27 innings, gave up 2 runs in 27 innings. Got him moved up to AA. Okay, so that's all we saw of him. 27 innings, 2 runs allowed. Struck out 40 in 27 innings. Wow. ERA 0.67. Overmatched the hitters in the time he was with us. Okay, so a couple other things to add that I think, to me, sort of stood out. One was that they were very aggressive in moving him along. Last year was his first year, really, of pro ball. The previous year, he had thrown 13 innings total after being drafted in July, and then they brought him in. He threw 13 innings. So last year really was his first full season, really first real season. And he starts out in high A and finishes in AA. You don't see that much. I mean, you saw it with like a Mike Leake, but rarely does a pitcher start his career basically in high A and then that same year be in AA. So this is a guy that I bring that up because what if he had been on the normal timetable and had been in Daytona or finished the year in Dayton after starting in Dayton? I mean, his numbers
shutout after shutout.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, his numbers might be completely off the charts.
Right.
He finished in Chattanooga, made 20 starts there and had a 4.75 ERA. Had 119 strikeouts in 91 innings, and won the Reds minor league pitcher of the year. So that's another guy. I don't know that we'll see a lot of innings out of him in spring training because of the same reasons I just talked about with Phillips. They just got so many pitchers that they really have got to take a look at and settle up those 4th and 5th spots in the rotation. I just don't know that that he's going to get a lot of innings. I would be surprised if he did. If he does, it tells you that they are willing to look at him right now, because you can't invest innings in a guy that isn't going to be a factor out of the gate. It doesn't do him any good, and it doesn't do the organization any good. So we'll see. I would say, again, might be a guy that you don't see a lot of innings from, but I hope you see some. And then maybe later in the season, I mean, Ashcraft last year didn't throw a lot of innings in spring training. Spring training was very short last year to begin with, but that's a guy to keep an eye on, and a guy I really enjoyed. Just absolutely overmatched the opposition as a player without much experience. So Andrew Abbott, left-hand pitcher. Remember that name because he's going to be worth keeping. But again, much different kind of prospect than the other guys we've talked about who are just power arms that throw gas. He will throw high fastballs. He's got secondary pitches that guys at our level can't hit.
So the Reds 40-man roster sits at 40 right now. And one of the things that Jeff and I were watching is when it came around Rule 5 draft time, we were very interested in who they chose to protect and who they didn't. And one of the names that popped up as a guy that they chose to protect is a guy that, you know, quite frankly, Jeff and I need a little bit of education on, and we're hoping you know about him a little bit. I may not even say his name correctly, but is this Ricky Karcher?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Oh yeah. Ricky Karcher was a relief
What can you tell us about him?
Yeah. Okay. He started his college career at the University of Michigan, eventually transferred to a junior college and got drafted out of junior college. And he has been a reliever the last couple of years. And again, power arm, high 90s with an outstanding breaking ball, has big league stuff, top level elite big league stuff. What he has not had is good command. And that's going to dictate his level of success. They have him on the 40-man. He's got a lot of potential. He is 25 years old. So not exactly, spring chicken. By 25, you need to be knocking on the door of the big leagues. Although with a pitcher, it can obviously take a little longer. The season we had him in Dayton, just when I say he's had trouble throwing strikes, how about this? Okay. In Dayton, we had him for 18 games out of the bullpen in 21. He threw 19 innings and walked 30 walks in 19 innings. Okay. So we saw a lot of struggles to throw strikes. Games where he would come in the game. I think he had a game where he walked. He did have a couple of games where he gave up the majority of his runs all in one inning, and his ERA was 5.12. But again, most of the runs came in short spurts. He had one game, as I recall, where I think he walked the first 4 in the inning, and the 5th guy hit a grand slam. So there's 5 runs right away. He only gave up 11 in the time with us. 5 of them came right there. But he showed improvement last year when he got to AAA. Started the year in AA. I thought he would come back to us, to be honest with you. Our manager, Brian LaHare, saw him in spring training, said he looked outstanding. So he starts the year in Chattanooga, pitched well, 42 strikeouts in 25 innings. The walks were better, but not good enough. 21 walks in 25 innings. That's not going to be good enough. But he pitched pretty well, 3.24 ERA. So they move him up to AAA, a lot of improvement, 19 walks in 32 innings. That's much better. Now that's getting on the borderline of being okay, being acceptable. Still higher than you'd like, but in that conversation of, well, maybe we can make this work. So can he keep improving? The strikeout numbers were still really high, and the number of hits allowed really low, and he improved on the number of walks. So you're talking 1 inning stints out of the bullpen where he comes in and he's throwing to the high 90s with a hammer of a breaking ball. Can he throw strikes? That's the question with Karcher. And big pitcher's body, 6'4", 230. You look at him and you'd say, boy, he looks like he could throw the ball through a brick wall. He's just got that great pitcher's build. And the kind of arm that people in the Reds organization really, really like. And it's just going to be a question of, can he improve his command and control so that he's not giving up the number of walks he gave up when he was in Dayton.
As we've said multiple times this offseason, opportunity abounds in the Cincinnati Reds outfield. And when you look through the farm system, there's really no bona fide studs who are coming up and getting ready to take over some spots. I asked Tom exactly how the outfield situation is going to play out. Coming up next. Before we talk about that, though, I want to tell you about another one of today's sponsors, and that is FanDuel. FanDuel is the #1 sportsbook in America, and when you're talking about where we are in the sports calendar, we are in the middle of the NBA season, and FanDuel is the perfect companion throughout the NBA season because new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download FanDuel Sportsbook today. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers to guys who are going to make three-pointers in the NBA. Plus, you can also bet on MLB futures. And I'm looking at one as we look at possible National League Rookies of the Year. Elly De La Cruz comes in with odds at 12-1. To win the Rookie of the Year award. And if you want to check that out and more futures bets, like how many wins over-under that the Reds will have, check it out at FanDuel Sportsbook. They are the #1 sportsbook in America, and they are the official sportsbook sponsor of Locked on. Just head on over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get your no sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel. They're the official sports betting partner. They are an official sports betting partner of the NBA. In between episodes, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs. You can follow Steve at S. Offenbaker with 2 Fs. And you can follow the show at Locked On Reds. All right, let's jump back in and finish up our conversation as we look at the outfield with Tom Nichols. How do you foresee the outfield developing? Because, Nick Krall made that whole point. He wanted to trade for a guy, and he traded for Will Benson. But you need more than just one outfielder moving forward.
Some of those guys are going to have to develop, Jeff, and you hope one of them will. I mean, they took Austin Hendrick in the first round in 2020 out of high school in Pennsylvania. Reese Hines is a second-round pick who was an infielder, moved to the outfield, and he took to the outfield very well. And they're similar players in that they've got the ability to hit the ball a country mile. They're both fast, big, athletic, good hitters, but too many strikeouts. Right. So, I had a conversation at the end of last season with the minor league hitting coordinator, Dave Hansen, former big league hitting coach. And he said some things that were music to my ears after watching our hitting execution over 2 years, where we had a tremendously high number of strikeouts and broke the club record in home runs last year, which was great, but we had too many strikeouts. We didn't score enough runs. And he said, I want line drives. I want line drives through the middle or to all fields. And that is what I'm hoping we start to see. And I'm hoping that these guys who have ability, I mean, you watch Austin Hendrick, number 1 pick, and he struggled to get above 220. And you watch him and the ball flies off his bat, and it doesn't have to be a home run. When he hits a line drive, it's a rocket. But the problem is too many swings and misses. And so can they do what you just suggested? And one or two of those guys really takes a big step forward this year. Look for it, hopefully. I hope it happens, whether it's Hendrick or Hines or Justice Thompson or Jay Allen or one of the guys in Daytona, or somebody else that might move to the outfield. Like perhaps maybe they start thinking about moving Matt McLean to the outfield, something along those lines. Again, you as you said, you need some of those because all their prospects are shortstop right now. Right. And you need some of those guys to be able to develop at other positions to get you to a point where you've got a balanced team across the field and not all your guys, your top 3 prospects are all shortstops. Marte may be a third baseman now. So he's at the point where they maybe are moving him to another position. But a lot of the other guys, they have collected shortstops because those are your best athletes on the field, and you can move them elsewhere. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. But at some point, some of those outfielders are going to have to develop.
Matt McLean is one that I've been beating the drum for a move to the outfield. He played center field at UCLA. I interviewed him last season, and, before I even finished asking him the question about what position he would be, he basically just jumped in and said shortstop. I know he wants to be a shortstop, but I think if it ultimately comes down to you can be a big league center fielder or a Louisville shortstop, I think outfield wins every time. Kind of rate that possibility. Of all the guys you mentioned, I think he's the most natural move just because he's already played there.
Yeah, he's played it. He's got the speed. He's fast. He's kind of a Senzel type grinder type player. When we had Senzel was a great player. And I still have my hopes that eventually the Reds fans who've been disappointed in what they've seen so far will see the Senzel we saw. And I don't think it's out of the question. Injuries have held him back more than anything. Will it happen? I don't know, but I hope it does. But back to McLean, who's a similar kind of player. Again, he came out of UCLA and was a big hitter, and they aggressively moved him He starts his career in high A and goes to double A for a full season in his first full year. Aggressive move there. Hit 17 home runs. He walked a lot, but again, just way too many strikeouts. 127 strikeouts in 371 at bats. I don't have the percentages. I know in today's day, people want to hear strikeout percentages. I don't have those handy, but that's just way too many strikeouts. He's not that kind of player. That's an all or nothing type hitter. He needs to be a line drive, hit it to all fields, gap to gap, a lot of doubles, and hit for a much higher batting average, and do some things on the bases. He can steal a base. Stole 27 bases last year. I've certainly not given up on him as a player, but I think he's got something to prove as far as just cutting down on the strikeouts. And if that happens, he may want to stay at shortstop. And if he becomes the player that he hopes he can be, I'm sure he hasn't given up on that. Because if you're that kind of player, they don't have an all-star shortstop in the big leagues right now. They might at some point. De La Cruz may take over. If De La Cruz becomes the player we think he will, then somebody else will be moving to another position because he'll have a firm grasp there. Again, it goes back to they've got all these guys that were middle infielders and specifically shortstops. They're all going to have to. One of them will stay at shortstop. The rest will have to move somewhere else.
Greatly appreciate Tom's time as he gave us quite a bit of time, and we're even going to have a little extra episode coming up previewing who could be on the Dayton Dragons. Spoiler alert, Chase Petty is a name that could be on the Dayton Dragons along with Edwin Arroyo, the number 3 prospect in the system. Yes, the beginning of the season is once again going to be very exciting for the Dayton Dragons. You're not going to want to miss that. And if you missed the first part of our conversation, we broke down some key names. We talked a lot about Elly De La Cruz and some concerns that we might actually have for the Phenom. That was in our first part of the conversation with Tom Nichols. Thank you so much for listening to the Locked On Reds podcast, though. Now, go check out the Locked On MLB Prospects podcast as Lindsey Crosby gives you an in-depth look to every single farm system, including the Reds, on Locked On MLB Prospects. It's just like Locked On Reds, free and available on all platforms, including right here on YouTube. As we roll through, pitchers and catchers are reporting. The rest of the team is due to report next week, and we are less than 2 weeks from the first spring training game. Can't wait. February 25th. Let's go. And as we get closer to that, we are going to have you covered on everything Cincinnati Reds because we are Locked On Reds every single day.